Good morning. We're ready to start. This is the first formal meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, so welcome everybody. To begin with, there's the usual advice that we're to note that this meeting is to be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public are currently present may record and take photographs except where there are confidential exempt items. With that, move on to item 2, which is apologies. Apologies this morning from Ahmed. The other apologies? You may have apologies.
I've accepted the meeting invitation, which I'll try and get to.
Okay. Let's move on then. Item 3, appointment of the Coordinating Overview and Scrutiny Committee Deputy Chair. Can I move Kerry Jenkins? Thank you. Declaration of interests. Are there any declaration of interests? Starting without you, I'm afraid.
Don't you worry about that. So I'll just let you know, committee rooms 3 and 4 are looking very nice.
All that tells us you don't read your emails.
Well, I looked at it in my calendar, it said to see, but for some reason I read it as 3 and 4.
Okay, we've taken items 1, 2, 3, and we're on 4 reviewers. So, are there any declarations of interest? No. Action notes of the 8th of April. One slight problem here in that no one who was present at that meeting on the 8th of April is present here today.
You
are. Just arrived in time. I was just going to have to suggest that we note the minutes, but since you were present, you can presumably confirm they're accurate.
Absolutely accurate indeed, yes.
This is something we couldn't read the room.
Well, to be fair, I could have bounced someone else. I was in a meeting with someone else yesterday who did exactly the same thing. But no, they are absolutely right. And the only other takeaway I thought was quite funny was because in that meeting there was a mixture of councillors who were standing and weren't standing, if you know what I mean. And we seemed to split into 2 halves without anything. Half that side of the room, doesn't matter what party there were, those who weren't standing again sat on one side of the room, and everyone who was standing again sat on the other. But don't know what that said about everyone's subconscious.
Okay.
So in the notes of the 8th of April, it was considered as part of the Scrutiny and report as a recommendation that after the local elections, incoming cohort committee be asked to review the council's overview and scrutiny procedures and arrangements. So it also notes there's no agreement in relation to making changes from the past committee to the next one. But I thought it's worth highlighting that it was a recommendation on the outcome one.
And if you go through to item 7, Scrutiny Work Programme, you'll see reference to that when we get to the Scrutiny Work Programme.
I thank you.
Okay. Given that, we move on having confirmed minutes because we now have one person in that meeting. Move on to the Scrutiny Business Report. Now, this is the report that's going to Council on the 12th of July. It's had to be hurriedly put together because the deadline on this were quite tight, given that the meeting, the report rather, had to be made public at the beginning of this week. So in effect, we had to sign it off on Monday morning of this week in order to get it out onto the council agenda. So I haven't really been able to consult on this because of the time scale involved. It really does reflect the Scrutiny Work Programme that follows on as item 7. But I thought, given that I hadn't been able to consult on it, it might be wise, since it's the report going to council, that you had a chance to think about things here And if there are issues that you want to raise, maybe we can raise them here in advance of the council meeting next week. And I'll just leave it at that and ask if there are any comments that anybody wishes to make or might want to make at the council meeting next week. Jack, have you got any comments? No one? Okay, well, I can only hope that the business report is acceptable to the whole of the council when we meet on Tuesday next. With that, can I move on to the work programme, item 7 on the agenda. And this, we need to go through this in a particular way because there are some decisions we need to take in advance of moving on to other matters. But I think if you turn to section 2, you see that the first issue that I've got there in 2.3 is that up to 4 scrutiny inquiries will be undertaken during 22-23. Now, this is a matter which is given over to coordinating ONS under the Constitution. It's for coordinating ONS to determine which those inquiries should be. The reason for the up to 4 is simply the resources available to the scrutiny office. Now, an inquiry is a subcommittee or a task group, so it would not be the full membership of the committee who's undertaking the inquiry, or not necessarily the full membership. It could be a smaller number. If it's a smaller number, then it has to reflect the proportionality of the committee. So it's an opportunity for some more in-depth work to be done, given the resources that are available to the scrutiny office. Of course, if there is the opportunity, if resources are available further on in the year, there is no reason why we can't look at setting up further inquiries during the course of the year and undertaking something other than decided on this morning. So that's the first thing I'd have to say. What I'd like to do is then go through the work programme on a committee by committee basis, because that is the first of the recommendations that we need to consider the draft work programme as in Appendix 1. And what I'd like to do is then to go through that, as I say, on a committee by committee basis, and ask each scrutiny chair if they would take the lead on doing precisely that. So if I start off looking at Appendix 1 with the coordinating overview of the scrutiny committee, then what I've set up there is that in the first meeting, which is scheduled for the next meeting rather, which is scheduled for the 9th of September, we'll follow through on the discussion that took place at the informal meeting, and therefore take an update report on everyone's battle and everyone's business action plan. Now, the hope was that we would get that to this meeting, but the cabinet member who was involved in that, John Cotton, wasn't able to make the July meeting of coordinating ONS, and therefore there was no alternative but to push it back to September. So that's why it's here as a September date rather than a July date. And then in the informal meeting, there were 2 issues that we commented on. And one was to look further at the previous ONS coordinating committee's work on customer services, but looking much more focused way on how that activity is embedding change in the council, in the way perhaps services are delivered, and also on how the council delivers services to the customer and residents. Has that work made a difference, both internally and externally to the council? So I think that's the purpose of That's the purpose of that report that will come in September. And Wendy Griffiths has already met with me and the scrutiny officers to talk through that report. And it may lead to coordinating ONS following through on Wendy Griffiths' report and undertaking some further work on how that customer service activity is, as I said, impacting externally to the council and internally to the council. The other thing is that we had a short discussion on the impact of the cost of living crisis on residents and the council. A little bit of work can be done between now and September to bring something forward to the September meeting. Now, personally, I think this is quite a big one. I don't know how it's impacting on the city council itself. There hasn't really been a discussion on that. We all know, we've got anecdotal evidence, etc., on the impact there is externally to the council. And I think that some work needs to be done, and it's been suggested that no one is at the moment looking in a coordinated way at this issue, and therefore coordinating ONS seems a reasonable vehicle to take this one forward. And I think it's going to be a challenging one for us, but an issue that is most certainly at the forefront of matters which need some investigation. The follow-on from the September meeting, I've suggested we pick up on the exempt accommodation activity of coordinating ONS. But once again, what I'd like to try and do with that is to not to understand what we've been doing as a pilot project within exempt accommodation pilots that are up and down the country, but how the work that we've done has actually impacted on our local communities where there is exempt accommodation. It's trying to set out a set of requirements in relation to the government as to what we might want changed, but how is the work that we've been doing, how is the focus that we've given on exempt accommodation impacting on our local communities who are affected by exempt accommodation? And I think that's something that could be quite valuable to those members whose areas do have to deal with the problems that arise from exempt accommodation. And there are several members who are affected who are part of the Scrutiny Committee. I've also thought that it might be wise to pick up on the deputy leader's role in relation to trailways and devolution and levelling up. It's moved from the leader to the deputy leader, and why there is an announcement expected from government, or announcements expected from government, or there were announcements expected from government. And I thought if we push it on to October, by that time there might be some clarification as to how that agenda is going to go nationally. Whether we're going to get that now is another matter, but I'm not going to comment on those issues. There were some other matters that we did discuss at the informal meeting. And one of those was business change efficiency and improvement for the council. Others were risk management, customer services, emergency planning, strategic partnerships, the council's lead on levelling up, devolution, investment, and combined authority. Those are perhaps to come at some point, but I thought it appropriate not to go too far in taking forward the agenda into November and December. Let a few things pass under the bridge before we set an agenda too far out for the rest of the year. Now, there are matters to be scheduled, and one of the ones that Alex referred to earlier is then in that list that is that follows on in the to be scheduled list, Alex. Structure and governance of the council is sitting there. So that's why I said you will see later on overview and scrutiny arrangements, the penultimate line on the last report. So we have flagged up some of the issues that will come to this before this committee, and I set out what hope to provide for in the September meeting that follows. I've said enough. I'll invite comment, and your comments will be quite valuable in helping us plan the work program of this committee. Sean.
I think comfortable. First of all, I want to know who will be involved with scoping of these views. Will we have all the members of the committee, or will the individual committees in scoping the document of the on the company parties? Obviously, now we will get the impact rate because conflicts have in the major cluster, they are themselves wide, also impacted by the carbon, and everything else. So I don't know whether we'll just focus on residents of the party or we'll also look at the corporate impact of carbon. And similarly, on the debt leads portfolio, that we not. At the moment, it's mystery to me, all who determines which area gets second or leveling up, really. So that's another thing we're talking about. One elected members have taken in which area to be proposed to go to if the leveling up on is still relevant.
Well, if I take 2 points, and then ask maybe Christian or one of the other screening officers to come in. Sean, on your last point, I don't know what will be happening in regard to that levelling up agenda. I heard a comment on radio this morning from one of the newly appointed ministers that they will not, the education minister, that they will not be taking forward any new issues prior to the election of the new prime minister. In other words, how much business as usual will there be in the coming months? So I don't know where we've got a new Secretary of State. Where is this levelling up agenda going to be going? How's that going to be taken forward? And in what direction, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is, we haven't got anything in until September. October. We haven't got anything until October, and therefore, hopefully, there'll be a little more clarity on that agenda. After all, it's being said at the moment that the new Prime Minister will be in place prior to the party conferences, which are in September. And therefore, I hope that this levelling up agenda will have some clarity by the time that we get to October. I'll bring it in a moment to you. That's the first point. I think we don't know what the agenda is at the moment. Deputy Leader doesn't know what the agenda is at the moment. She was expecting something to come from government. Whatever she was expecting will now be delayed without a doubt. And therefore, the fact that we've got it in on an October date gives us a chance that there'll be some greater clarity, if you like, as to what this agenda is all about by the time we get there. On the customer services one, that's going to be driven initially by Wendy Griffiths, the head of customer services. She will bring a report which she is going to put together. She has very much welcomed. I met with her, all the scrutiny officers. I met with her last week. She has very much welcomed us taking on this work. I think it would be an interesting report. There are some of us in here who were party to the early discussions on the customer services agenda. And I think she's got a number of things that you'll be interested to hear. What I want to do is push a little on what the impact of the work that's been done already and is being done, what the impact of that is internally in the council, and how the council manages and shapes services, and how those services are acting out there in delivery terms to improve the benefit for the customers, the residents of Birmingham. Wendy's keen to bring that forward to committee. The discussion we'll have in September will shape then, Sharon, what work we do subsequently and who inputs to it and how they input to it. But the report initially will come from Wendy Griffiths, the head of customer services. Let me bring Christian in as to maybe some general comment, Christian, as to how the scrutiny office will function in providing support, not just to this committee, but to all the other ONS committees in helping them shape agendas, etc., and bring work forward.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think in terms of process, I think we wanted to spend a lot of time at the start of the year with the work program. I think it's really, really important. So I think what some of the things that I think have already started is sort of meeting with relevant chairs with the scrutiny team. And I think what we can do is look at how we sort of develop that moving forward in terms of the planning sessions. Obviously, we meet quite frequently in terms of monthly meetings. What I suggest is that once we have a more developed work program for each of the committees, we can look at meeting with the chairs with the relevant officers. There's a clear ask for officers in terms of reports. There's a clear expectation about what officers are being asked to prepare. And I think we can do that once we have those work programs in place. In terms of the scope of the inquiry work, I think we can come on to that once you've agreed as a committee which inquiries you'll be taking forward. I think the advantage of the timing of these meetings is obviously, apart from the Commonwealth Games meeting that took place earlier this week, all of the committees are to follow. So by the time we get to the meetings in July, we will know which the inquiries are. We can then work with the relevant committees about how we scope those pieces of work. And of course, that would include, the relevant chairs, deputy chairs, etc. The other thing I was just going to say is one of the key things for today for me is there's a few pieces of work that have been put forward that play across quite a number of committees, or at least 2 committees. It would be really useful this morning to get a sense from this committee in terms of what you think that makeup of those inquiries should be. Is it 2 and 3? Who's leading the committee, etc. So I think if we can come to that during the meeting, we can then sort of take that forward and think about how best to build that together for you.
Ewan?
Yeah, thanks very much. I can imagine from the committee certainly looking forward that anything that changes the government you don't like because it's sudden uncertainty added into a very uncertain world. I think if it helps, I think Greg Clark is the one who's been put on the levelling up side of things. I think he's a very capable minister. I think it says a lot that he's been put there when Boris withdrew the whip from him at one stage because the two of them weren't seeing eye to eye, but he's an incredibly skilled minister who knows that department inside out. So I think he's only been put there to make things run smoothly. I think so that should be something that could be hopefully give you some confidence, as much as I appreciate you may not have that much confidence in the government. But I would say though, moving on, that I don't know exactly what the timetable is, but the understanding is that over the next couple of weeks, the front 2 will be decided, and that during August it'll go out to membership to who will the leader be. August is generally the time when a lot of the MPs decide it's a good time to spend a lot of time with their constituents, is the best way to phrase it, I think. So I think they'll be back in September spending a lot of time, and there'll be a new leader then. So I think that the disruption will be as minimal as possible.
Thanks, Ian. I actually do know Clark from former years. Alex?
Hey, you enjoy our side.
Sorry?
Maybe the next 5 minutes of it, there's 2 points to make out of it. In terms of the suggestions for inquiries, I know that we've got suggestions from
Alex, if you can hold that, we want to bring each of the chairs in and deal with appendix.
Yes, it is relevant to the point because we've got suggestions from 5 of the scrutinies, but we haven't come forward. So I don't know whether it's worth scrutiny chairs to try and make those considerations before we consider what inquiries we want to look at.
Sorry, Alex. All scrutiny committees at their informal meeting have discussions around work programme. And it's a consequence of those discussions that we've got the suggestions that are in Appendix 2 today. If a committee hasn't come forward with one, it's because they didn't come up with a suggestion at that time.
Okay, that's fine. Just wanted to seek clarification because it seems that education of children is not having something to be put forward. It seems a bit curious in my mind. And then the other suggestion was that the informal meeting.
Education and social care.
Yeah, we have.
I've got one. It's Appendix 2A, Alex.
So go on from education, children, social care. Apologies, it's one of the committees hasn't
Yeah, but
That's fine.
you're right in that point. Yeah.
Thank you. The other point that we made at the informal meeting was whether each of the scrutinies wanted to take everyone's everyone's business back to the scrutinies to see if you would like to put on the scrutiny level how that can be rolled into your work programs or feedback into this scrutiny. So I think that's a relevant point in terms of consideration that would be EBD.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we don't know at the moment what that agenda is going to be to its extent. If you remember, the discussion we had was, would it be possible to bring it to the July committee meeting? It wasn't yet formally adopted, and therefore we would be bringing it in advance. If it came to the July meeting, we'd be bringing it in advance of it going to cabinet. And if you recall, I suggested that Deborah Cadman sorted out whether it would be possible to come to the July meeting. It came back yes, so there was no problem in bringing it to the July meeting, other than the fact that the cabinet member associated with it, John Conn, couldn't be here today.
Yes.
But if we can get an input, we will certainly try to get that input from the other committees for the September meeting.
I think perhaps it seems appropriate to try and get input from the committees directly. So in the next meetings, if it may be consideration, we wish to consider how the BB is relatable in terms of each of the witnesses. Next meeting, bring forward, and then they'll combine that nicely with the report.
This is what it come in. Who wants to jump in first?
Just on the issue of qualities, I just wanted to raise that there is the full details of all the committee work programmes, because the time of this meeting means that the committees haven't formally agreed their work programmes yet. But for the Economy and Skills Committee, one of the items that they've identified is the breaking down the barriers, which is looking at inequalities in terms of access to skills and employment, and then the health and adult care, so social care committee has identified the Blaschere report, which looks at inequalities in the African Caribbean community. So there are elements of inequalities that are being picked up, and I think something that we can do as a scrutiny team is just map out where the inequalities issues are being looked at in depth by committees, and that can be reported back to coordinated committee, so you have an overview of where those equality issues are being followed through.
Yeah, just to sort of echo some of the points Fiona's made, I think EBEB will be an important tool for scrutiny. I don't think it's necessarily the only thing that you look at in terms of equalities. I think equality implications is something that we can look at whatever items on the agenda. But I think EBEB will be a useful tool as part of that.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say this bit about customer services. I'm beginning to lose the will to live over this. I was on this committee between 2004 and 2012. I think I'm probably the only one here who was. And we discussed this endlessly when Ian was the leader of the opposition councillors. And that's where the joke came from, that Ian and I always agreed on everything, because we were both so disgusted by the way that the centre and everything works. And nothing's better now, over 10, 12 years on. So can we look at this? Can we look at why it never gets sorted? Because, I mean, only this week I had an email from somebody saying, both my neighbour and I reported a month ago a bit of fly tipping, a small bit of fly tipping, and it hasn't been picked up. Can you deal with it? I contacted the depot and picking up today. So that's just a classic example. We've all got those of why it doesn't work, even though we've scrutinised it for 50, 20 years now. So I would like to look deeper into why don't they sort it?
Well, if you look at the words that I've had put down here, I think that's exactly the agenda I'm trying to pick up. Because I don't want another discussion around customer services. I want a discussion around how the work that they've done and the database that they now have, how that is being used to reshape, if you like, the way things are managed here and the way things are delivered out there. I'm not wanting a discussion generally about customer services. I want to know that there is a positive impact from the work that has been done, or if there's not, that there's going to be an impact as a result of that work on internally to the council and externally. Exactly your agenda. Exactly your agenda.
Good.
Jack, and then I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the issue of equalities, one of the things that we are looking at on my scrutiny committee, on our games, culture and physical activity scrutiny committee, is looking at the benefits of the Commonwealth Games and Commonwealth Games legacy funding to various different communities across Birmingham, and that would be a long-term piece of work. Simply because seeing those benefits in the short term would be rather difficult, but that is something that we will be looking at and scrutinising as a committee to make sure that those benefits are felt by various different communities across Birmingham and the different diverse communities, either by identity or otherwise. And that came from various suggestions from the committee. So that is something that we're looking at, and I think that can lead into a little bit around everyone's facets of business. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I was just going to say customer services, and I think it's worth, if we could look at, they seem to be working in a bit of a silo, like this phrase used all the time, they're just not communicating, I suspect. And the only reason why I mentioned that was that, yes, from something I said at Cabinet, I got a well-meaning email from someone senior in customer services said that they chased up why the green waste had missed a whole cycle in a big area of the city. And it was well-meaning email, and they said they'd spoken to the depot, and they said, but could I come back with the streets that were missed, right? And it just so happened this email dropped when I was meeting with senior management of the depot and of waste services. And they were sort of going, well, we don't need you to tell us what streets were dropped. We know what were dropped, and because the meeting was what's being done to improve that going forward. And there just seemed to be, you've got two senior people from two senior departments, and neither of them seem to be aware of what the other one was doing, because they said I can give you a better lowdown on what roads we dropped that week. Because it'd be easier to tell which ones we collected rather than which ones were dropped. And yet they're saying that we're asking you for the thing. That's not the case. And for me, we really need to look into why is it you've got two very professional, organised people from two separate departments who are meant to be working together to give you an answer. And to me, there's a gulf there that I can square with.
And it's exactly the sort of comment you would bring forward in September.
Yeah.
We should therefore I want to pick up Deirdre's agenda here. And if we could use the sort of evidence that you can today to that meeting with me in September, let's see if this committee can help shape a change in the management practices, if you like, and an improvement in the delivery of the services out there in our wards.
I completely agree. I'm just going to say, because I think when we did in the last year, or it was last year actually, there was a Carl brought the motion of the scrutiny report to council and asked me to second it. And Bridget replied to say that she fully accepted the change needed to make. So I'm agreeing with you that work has got to be done, has been done already. So it's a question to find out why is it not delivering. So I'm agreeing.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just still on that discussion. I mean, one of my ready recommendations is how much casework I have to chase because I haven't had a reply after 3-4 weeks. And in my mind, it's basically a fairly steady proportion. It carries on being far too high. Hasn't really changed. There seemed to be a little flurry in the last week of people sending me replies to casework from a long time ago. So maybe there's a little work being done on chasing up the. But and we should be. I mean, what's already been said. I mean, the best organisations use complaints as warning signs of where things are going wrong. We should know. But we should be using customer service as. I think it's cohort as flagging out across the council, which are the areas under greatest pressure, but perhaps should be getting the greatest attention because we know there are issues anywhere, but which are the ones that are causing the most problems to our residents. Beyond that, I wanted to make a couple of comments. One is within, and you might regard this as being within the governance bit, but I think there is something we need to look at in terms of member-officer relationships. And that's being looked at from time to time, but I'll sort of pick up that as an organisation, there's been so many changes I'm not confident that always those relationships are working as they should. I don't know whether I'm a lone voice and being concerned about that or not, but that's certainly, I sort of seem to pick up, okay, you know, emails Sunday, that's not right, that's not the way things should work. I'll put that out there. Nobody else agrees with me, nobody feels concerned about it, fair enough. But the other one is about the role of this committee in terms of the climate change agenda, and one might now rephrase that, perhaps climate change and energy security agenda post the events of February, and whether you know, beyond the role of the individual scrutiny committee looks at that. You know, I'm on housing and neighbourhoods. Housing and neighbourhoods give the right priority to climate change, maybe to box off with another scrutiny committee and other processes, but it doesn't seem to me that it gets the attention it should do in our scrutiny committee. So again, whether there's a role in this committee in giving an overview of that work.
Rather than give you an answer now, Roger, can I just simply ask the scrutiny officers to think about that question and to come back to me with some sort of comment, which then I can circulate around the members of this committee, and that will allow us then to give some consideration to what you've made and maybe come up with the best way forward. That's how I think I deal with that bit. Your first point, I've just got forgotten it now.
Late responses to member inquiries.
Look, I think that's what we should be picking. That's an issue you can pick up when Wendy comes in and reports in September. This is sort of member perspective that we need to put before officers who are managing these bits of work. We often have a very different perspective to management, to the officers of the council, and this is an opportunity to bring that perspective to the fore. Okay, look, I need to probably move this agenda on. Appendix 1 dealt with the coordinating review and scrutiny work programme. I think there are some issues that we need to take away, and I'll do so in consultation with the officers, and pick up some of the points that you've all made and shape what we do over the coming months or two. Did you want to say something there?
I just want to clarify something for the September meeting.
Yeah.
I think that's before we move on to the.
Okay.
Okay. As the chair's outlined, for the September meeting, the work programme includes everyone's battle, everyone's business action plan. What we've also tried to do is invite cabinet members to talk about other issues within their portfolio that are relevant to the committee at the time. So I have included a separate item on the cabinet member to update on priorities, but there's also the customer services and now the cost of living crisis. So that's potentially 4 quite heavy items at that meeting. I'm just wondering if you want to focus on the action plan, customer services, cost of living, and then maybe look at the other areas of cabinet members' portfolio at a different meeting. Because I think otherwise half an hour for each of those items probably wouldn't do them justice.
Possibly so, Fiona. Let's leave that there as a decision until a little later on, once we know how these are shaping out. But you're probably right, that there is too much identified for the September meeting to give some of those issues proper discussion. Okay, so can I move on then? I think that's 3.2 we dealt with. 3.3 is the inquiry proposals, and that's appendix 2. And what I'd like to do is to turn the meeting over to the individual chairs so that they can speak about the inquiry suggestion that has come from their committee. So the first of those is from the Education, Children's Social Care, ONS Committee on Child Exploitation in County Lines.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the paperwork already states the sort of overall focus of what we're putting forward, and it needs to be fully scoped. But the hope is to understand how the council works with all of the other partner schools, the Irish Reduction Partnership, to address and look at child exploitation. And we did say counterviolence and rate of crime because actually they're all sort of interrelated, because when particularly young people are exploited and criminally exploited, those other elements come into play as well. So, I mean, as well as information in the paper, we know that the menace of counterviolence has really been heightened through the pandemic. It's made young people much more vulnerable to exploitation. Young people have been much more isolated and cut off from the services that they would normally be accessing. It's often vulnerable young people that are exploited because it's an easier option for those ruthless gangs looking for an easy addition to the teams, the teams of young people taking risks for them. And that there's real evidence that gangs often deliberately target care homes, PRUs, foster care and supported housing. I think this area should be a real concern for us as a council. It's significant, it's increasing. We can't just solve it on our own because it's not just a council issue. We've got to make sure that we're working with all of our partners and looking at what they are doing. But for this inquiry, I think we need to understand how council is actually working with schools in particular, with teachers and head teachers and governing bodies, because there's also clear evidence that young people who are excluded from school are part of that growing group and that are being targeted. So we need to examine possibly how those schools and governing bodies are making those decisions, how they're better educated to spot those danger signs. And, ultimately it's that multi-agency working across that wide range of partners. And this inquiry would allow us to investigate if that multi-agency approach is actually taking place and is effective. So that's it in a nutshell, really, and that's why we were hoping that, that inquiry would be one of the four that are agreed today. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Alex?
Thank you, Albert. I also want to acknowledge the work that Kerry's done in Scrutiny over quite a number of years on this, and I think she has very articulated very clearly about the frustrations that we've had over a number of years, but also how the scope can lead into other areas. So it does kind of go off into youth violence prevention, attacked children. We mentioned missing children, exclusions, prevention, trust, deprivation. It does get bigger and bigger, so it's quite hard to set the remits, I think. So we do it's a big project. We'll try and do something small, narrow, and focused. So I think that's something which I think we particularly struggle at Scrutiny as well, and how to do it, how to do the scope properly. That would mainly concern absolutely. We should do something on this. It's just how we also.
Yeah, and I think Alex is totally correct, because when we have discussed child exploitation in the past, and we know that a really good piece of really work was done some years ago looking at child sexual exploitation, and we've talked about child exploitation a couple of times, for a number of years on Scrutiny, and it is such a huge area that those were concerns that I raised in terms of this has to be a bit more focused, because we need to do a piece of work that actually achieves something at the end of it, and we have to be realistic in what we can achieve in that very short space of time for us to do this work. So yeah, totally take that on board, Alex, and when we're scoping that with the Scrutiny support, we will be bearing that in mind. So thanks for that.
No other comment? Could we then move on? 2B is the Economy and Skills Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and their suggestion is around ensuring the skills agenda for Birmingham meets the need of current and future employers and job opportunities. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is come out of sort of looking at the employment figures, and I think it's been a while since we've actually looked at the skills across the city and whether we are sort of meeting the requirements of employers, in particular in certain sectors. So I think with this sort of piece of work, we're hoping to look at specific sectors and whether we're matching, the skills that we're offering in the city to what the requirement is of employers, because I think what we find is, particularly in, say, construction, we're having the workforce coming from outside of Birmingham because we're not, offering the right sort of skills, courses, etc. to residents of Birmingham. So this is, I think, where it's kind of coming from, and we seriously need to look at our unemployment rates because, compared to other areas, we are performing poorly. So I think it's really important. In terms of obviously, we still have scoping to do to look at more specific sectors of what we want to look at. But coming on to equalities, that's something that we hope to sort of incorporate in this. And the thing I keep mentioning again and again is there's certain sectors where we need to improve representation in. For example, women in construction, they are very underrepresented in that field, and what more can we do? Also, with the European social funding disappearing very soon, what have we got in place that is going to fulfill that sort of that's funding and that skills that will take away once that finishes. So yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping with this we're proposing to do.
Thanks, Simon. A comment from me to start with. I think the conclusions your committee will reach, Simon, in terms of are we meeting the needs of employers? No. That's why unemployment in the city is stubbornly 3 times or thereabouts the national average, and it's been so for years and years and years. And we are not seeming to make an impact on that situation. For me, one of the key areas, and you've got it in your aims and objectives, is where the funding is going to come from. Because you're absolutely correct. ESF is not quite finished, but DWP have put out the last of the opportunities for projects to come forward for funding. And it's in the tail end of what they call N+3. That is, you've got 3 years after the approval for the project to be signed off or completed, if you like. So they're just about to move into a rundown period on ESF. The government will come forward with the Shared Prosperity Fund, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is meant to be the replacement for ERDF and ESF. But given the changes nationally now, once again, there must be some sort of potential delay, if you like, with that coming forward. And we don't yet know whether the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is going to be dealt with on a regional or local basis, or whether it's going to be through a central diktat, if you like. So it's not only the quantum of the Shared Prosperity Fund, it's the way in which it's going to be controlled, the way in which it's going to be delivered, that will impact on what it is we can ourselves do. Anyone want to comment? Alex? Go.
Yes, thank you. No, fine. I think that I'd be interested to see the findings of it, really. I think that it was pleasing that, there was a big rush that everyone was to go to university, etc. I think that's good that everyone gets a skill. I don't think it necessarily have to go to university to have a happy, affluent lifestyle, you know what I mean? And I'm interested to find out people who are getting training, are they getting training for things that actually can take them forward into a job? There are many people who have had a great success and not been to university. I think that the leader of the council is a great example. He said in cabinet fairly recently that he hadn't been to university, but he picked up his skills from other areas, and that just shows you that you can get to being probably, probably the leader of the biggest council in Europe without going down that route. And so I just think that you've got to make sure that when people are setting people off on their journey about where they're going to go for employment, are they setting them off are they telling them on all the different options that people can do so that they can get that? I just worry sometimes if some of the construction industries that you're quite rightly highlighting, are they being sold as being as equally as important as doing some of the roles? Because they clearly are. They're highly rewarded jobs and they're very satisfying. Nothing's better than when you can stand back from a job well done and say, look, I've done that. And when you're doing things on site, it's a challenging procedure. It could be raining, snowing, doing whatever, and you've still got to get a tight finish on it for people if they're moving into a house or something. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what you get out of that. Really cool. Thank you.
Alex, did you want to comment?
Yeah.
Okay. Sean?
Thank you. You know that the industry and the sort of the arts community over the one, they have one who was for years and years are according to track of not making vehicles like a lot of quality not to get in right at home. Issue for me is yes, funding is important, but over the years, I think what our funding has from the government is all well used by the people who provide the training and skills. The fact that who do these properties for them that they are living what they want to live. I mean, historically, look at the able to provide those skills and training in our area, in these areas. Take stuff out of the game when the money is in, and nobody seems to come or say, scrutinize the effectiveness of the objects of these provided. So I think that's a different angle as well, not only where you get adequate funding, where the also what are we doing? Are we doing right? In the sense we can keep up the commission to provide the skill training. Are they doing the right job? Or are they only lying in your pockets?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to see what comes out of this. I think back to, talked about how stay the same in terms of customer service, but in terms of regeneration and employment provision, trying to tackle long-term chronic unemployment. I remember I was in my first stint in the council with what's what then called single regeneration budget. And there was a project in Sparkhill, Sparkbrook and Tyseley, SLB3, I think, and it created something like, I can't remember what the figures were, but a large number of jobs. And having created this large number of jobs, the unemployment level in the area where the jobs had been created was exactly the same as it had been before. Now, whether that was because actually it was, falsely reporting the number of jobs, or potentially the people that got decent jobs in those areas then moved somewhere else. Whatever, that sort of was never investigated and looked at. So it's what the impact of spending to try and tackle the problem actually really is, rather than the outcomes versus outputs of the debate. I think it's really important part of that.
Any other comments? Simon, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm welcome comments from everyone, and this is, I think it's really important that we identify, where these skills shortages are, and we're matching sort of the skills that we're providing to those specific sectors. And I think we need to do that
not wait until, the employers are having to bring workforce from outside of Birmingham. We need to be aware of that a lot sooner, and we're doing a lot more beforehand. So I think this is a really important, something that I'm really passionate about as well. So I think it's really important that piece of work that hopefully we can achieve something positive out of it.
Thanks. Let's move on. We've got 3 proposals from the Health and Social Care ONS Committee. Maybe we'll take them one by one if we can. So can we look at Appendix 2C, which has promoting health and well-being, a Commonwealth Games legacy? I'd like to speak to that one.
Okay, cheers, Chair. This is one we were looking potentially to do as a joint committee with the Commonwealth Games Committee. We were looking at it because it's a topical issue at the moment. I think as it says in the sections on why is the inquiry being proposed, it's because it's an inequalities issue in terms of health across the city, between different communities across the city. I think the members are quite keen to get involved in it, to potentially get communities, actual residents involved in this to understand what works for them in terms of sport, what works for them in terms of activity. Because my own personal view regarding this is I think sometimes Commonwealth Games are seen as a sport, and therefore it sort of ceases when people reach middle age. It's interesting, I know last week there was a comment regarding Serena Williams, that she's approaching 40 years of age. Is that that's a cut-off point in terms of when people should be ceasing to be taking physical activity. We all know physical activity is really important in terms of your physical well-being, social interaction, your relationships, your awareness of outdoors, your mental well-being, and potentially in terms of the link with the third project, in terms of dementia, there's a clear linkage between them, between lack of physical activity, depression, and then a linkage into dementia. So we thought it was something that was really useful in terms of making sure there's a genuine legacy in terms of people, physical health and their mental health, in a way that I don't think happened after the London Olympics. I think there was a major splurge, and what I'd like to see in Birmingham is an ongoing commitment to ensuring that things, for example, such as walking football and Tai Chi, which in some countries take place for people from the 50s, 60s and 70s, can actually occur in Birmingham as well. And we can improve everybody's physical and mental well-being.
Any comments or questions at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on that, there is some other pieces of work that we are doing as a Commonwealth Games Scrutiny Committee that can possibly link into that. One of the things that actually I am hoping to meet with Richard Brooks about is to discuss the digitalisation asset map that he's been leading on, but actually including different cultural and physical activity opportunities for people across Birmingham, and having that on the asset map so that we can visualise where those gaps are and where those inequalities are in terms of access to physical activity opportunities. But I'm very eager to work with Mick and his committee on the work that he wants to put forward. And happy to do any joint work and have discussed that informally with scrutiny officers as well previously. And that is also a placeholder in our work schedule as a scrutiny committee.
Anyone else want to comment? Okay, can we move on to the next one, Mick, which is Appendix 2D, Children and Young People's Mental Health.
Okay. Again, thank you, Chair. Again, this would have potentially been a shared project, this time with education and children's social care. This, I think, is important when we look at the actual statistics which are quoted here in terms of the 2 in 5 children with mental health disorders are accessing specialist mental health services. I think there's been an increased awareness of mental health conditions and the need for an improved mental health services across the board. I think COVID and the impact of COVID on younger people is been it's something that we need to be aware of in terms of interruptions to children's mental well-being, in terms of their education, the way they've been impacted in terms of, I know people who've been to university and their university experience has not been what it should have been. And I think children, and we will be looking to this for the children, people up to 25 years of age. I think it's something that's really important to making sure that the services we get in are reflective in terms of best practice. They're reflective in terms of what children and young people's mental health issues actually are. We have a link to be making sure that this is healthy and inclusive to cities, so it would link into the corporate plan. The challenges are in terms of overall well-being. So I think there's a lot we could say in terms of actually why that should be included as a subject we should take on board.
Any comment?
Very quickly, Chair, I completely agree. I think it's one of the issues that certainly is constantly come up in school visits that I've done in the board. And in terms of the very good work that parents should do in support groups, I think it's important to get their take on where the gaps are and what we can do to try and help.
Anyone else? Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is something that we've discussed on Scrutiny before, and Alex and myself have raised this numerous times, and I do think it would be a really valuable piece of work to undertake, because as Mick said, you know, young people have really, children and young people have really suffered through the pandemic in terms of their well-being and their mental health. And I think if this inquiry is picked up, it would also be a really good opportunity to look at and sort of, you know, where where we're not possibly meeting all of those specific needs in terms of services that we're providing to young people. But, you know, if this is one that goes ahead, I'll be really keen to work with Nick on this, and yeah, be a really good inquiry.
Okay, no further comment. Could we move on to Appendix 2E, which is the third of your proposals? Why is dementia different for women?
Thank you, Chair. This is a sort of build-on to a report that the committee did about 4 or 5 years ago in terms of dementia. I think this is something that interests me personally from family connection. When you look at statistics, women are more affected by dementia than men, and worldwide, women have more dementia than dementia 2 to 1. Women are obviously more likely to, we know, live longer than men, but the issues of dementia are often caused by diseases of the brain, as opposed to purely in terms of the aging process. Dementia is, for women, the leading cause of death, whereas for men, it's the third cause of death. It's exacerbated by, and this is where the equality side comes into it, in terms of social isolation and depression have been identified as 2 of the major factors relating to dementia. And when we look at the moment, certainly across the country, the number of women aged over 70 living alone, twice that compared to men of that age. The women's healthcare experiences show a clear difference between healthcare for men and women in G20, and at the moment, the situation in this country sadly is deteriorating. The link with this, with the first one in terms of sport and activity, is that hypertension and physical activity, or lack of them as people get into their 40s, are a major cause of setting people onto depressive conditions, which can then actually lead to dementia. And that again links into the issues of people living alone, which links into the equality side of things. The final point of it is in terms of women are much more likely to become carers. About 2/3 of unpaid carers are women, and 81% of unpaid carers in the country experience isolation, depression and anxiety as part of their role, all of which are factors which lead to cognitive decline. So I think it's an issue that builds on what the council's done before in terms of dementia, but as we said, it affects all people in Birmingham, but there's an increased impact for people for women compared to men.
Any questions or comments? So can we move on then to the final one, which is probably Mr. 2F, and Sharon, that comes from your housing and neighbours committee. No, sorry, I'm interested. On cleaner streets.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, we picked this up as we all experienced over the last decade or so. This is something which we experienced ourselves as elected members, and this is the service that we get most complaints from the residents. And despite spending and allocating millions and millions of extra resources over the last 10 years, particularly in the last 8 to 10 months, we don't get any improvements. Although in the last 8 months, we have seen some improvement, but not at the level that we would welcome. And to tackle that, we are going to work with the local residents, the residents groups, and volunteer sector organizations. And although it's not here in the report, but my intention is to work to recommend as a committee that working with closely with the housing associations, social landlords, is really important, because in Birmingham we got thousands and thousands of stock belonging to them. And they need to work with their tenants and remind them of their responsibility to keep their properties nice and tidy. And also, we should be working closely with the local estate agents who are managing properties on behalf of the landlords, because we get most of the problems coming from them as well. So, and also we want to work with, learn from the best practice local authorities who have been successfully tackling this issue, and learn from their experience. And we also want to work closely with the Keep Britain Tidy, and because they provide litter picking, equipment and all that, how we can engage them with the local residents groups, so that we all work over together as a coordinator, work, we can achieve a lot better than we are doing at the moment.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Because I used to be on this committee last year and I'm not now, so I don't know what's happening now. But we were doing at the end of last year a piece of work on litter bins, which I can't say I necessarily like the way it's going, because the premise was that if you have fewer litter bins, you'll get less litter, and I'm not sure I agree with that. But anyway, I'm interested to know what's happened to that piece of work, because it sounds connected to this piece of work. So is that
As I remember, I mean, with
Officers,
Yeah.
media, you have?
No, it hasn't been dropped, but I think the intention is, you are right, it is linked, and I think this will be the piece of work that will be taken forward, and the idea is that the Lisbon piece of work will follow on from this.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's not been dropped, it's
Incorporated into this. I think it's what.
But if I can add on to that subject, because when I first got elected in 2020, we had a lot of local money in those days, neighborhood renewal fund and all that, and we almost put every road, 4 to 6 litter bins, and within 6 to 12 months, we were getting complaints from the residents, because then those spots became hot spots for putting the black bags and all that. So although they are quite successful in some time, but sometimes this can be a problem.
We took evidence from some other councils, I can't remember you on it, I can't remember who they were now, but their officers said, oh, if you take out this bin, you get less litter. Which, as I say, I personally didn't agree with, but that was definitely a main piece of evidence that the committee got.
Okay, Roger?
Yeah, I mean, just following on from that, I mean, I think to me, the important bit about that is the word localization within this. And that sometimes it may be taken out, it's a bit, will actually help. I share David's skepticism that in most cases it will, but it's actually more about putting reliance on the local knowledge of members and the community. I had a case in mind where the council took out a litter bin because of flight bins going on beside it, and after taking out the flight bin, carried on where the litter bin used to be. And the actual problem was a badly regulated HMO. And once issues in that HMO, we dealt with the flight stocks. So it wasn't the bin that was causing the flight, it was the issues of that property. And the community knew that, but the person who did that didn't. So it's about putting a greater sort of reliance on local knowledge and local priorities. I welcome the description of sort of engaging more with other bodies. It isn't, while the council has the lead on this, it should be about working with partners, with social landlords, with all those other organisations as well. And again, where they actually understand what's going on in an area, building on their knowledge and help working with them to put it right. I mean, the localisation, it does play very strongly into the localisation agenda. But I had this endless repetitive questions on the committee about the waste management setting cleansing schedules that are unrealistic because they don't allow for people being on holiday, being on sick. What then happens is they pick and choose which bits they want to do, and it'd be much better to have realistic cleansing schedules that allow for that people on. That's it, and then you can actually be held to and actually deliver. And whenever you say this, you just get, oh yeah, that's a good idea, councillor, we'll try and wear that up next time. And it never happens. So it's fun, but we need someone to actually make it happen and then see what the results of it are.
I think, monitoring is important because, these litter pickers in my ward, I see 4 or 5 roads, regularly, but the rest of the ward, they've never seen. And then, I can pick up on the miscollections, right, in my ward regularly. And I've been taking with the depot managers that whoever is responsible managing the stuff for wheelie bins, if they have missed certain roads, certain parts of the ward, they need to report them back to the managers by the afternoon or by the evening. These are the parts we missed and why. Because from the residents, we get information on drips and drabs. And then we reported, we get this week they missed in my ward on Tuesday. And this Wednesday I had residents of 2 wards reported it. And then the following day, 3 roads residents reported it. And then yesterday, 2 people reported it as well. And then so somebody reported at the depot on the same day. So, and what are they going to do about it? This keeps, we can inform residents when it's going to happen.
I'll bring Kerry in just a second, but I think I was alluding, if you like, to some of these issues when I talked about this coordinating committee having a look at how the industrial services work has impacted on service delivery issues and the outcomes at a local level. So there is something of an overlap beginning to appear, I think, between what is suggested in this very specific piece of work and the bit that I think will be able to work that will be able to initiate through the coordinating committee, not just deal with waste management issues, but it will deal with all the other areas of service where there needs to be service impact or change.
Thanks so much, Albert. I think that I agree with Roger completely. I think I've seen an expansion of bins in my ward. Residents wanted all the bins replacing in one of the parks, and so I think it was about 7 or 8 of the bins were replaced there because they were being regularly used. 2 or 3 bus stops have seen new bins put onto, and that was just basically because residents again wanted it. There was 1 bin that disappeared, and the council said that they'd never taken it out. So the only theory that people could come up with was that because it was metal, that someone taken it to try and recycle it. No one will sort of sell it for scrap. I mean, that's the best you could come up with. But the local litter picks there saying they'd seen an increase in what needs to be picked up because obviously people getting on a bus, probably drop a crisp packet or something like that, gets blown away. So in our ward, for my ward is to say, I have seen that bins do make a difference. Obviously, they've got to be empty because if they start overflowing, that's a problem. I understand what you're saying. I've seen it next to, not in my ward, but I've seen it next to stations where you have those, recycling the shoe things and things like that. So someone thinks it's a good idea to drop a telly next to it. The mentality of that, I never quite get my head around. So I can understand the theory of that, but the experience of my own ward, where in areas where people congregate or are walking around a bin that they can easily use, that could be, you just got to make sure that those who empty it know it's on their route, don't forget about it, because when it starts flowing in itself, it's another issue, isn't it? And what you were saying there about miscollections and things like that, got residents are complaining. Sometimes they're trying to ring customer services to report a miscollection, no one's picking the phone up, is what they're telling me. And so I think there needs to be something there, residents saying they're reporting it by the web form and things like that. And the depot and they say they've never heard anything about it, so there needs to be, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, there needs to be something to try and draw these two services together because there's a massive communication gap.
I think on the question of bins, where it works better, there have bins. We should provide bins, and where it doesn't work, then we simply start looking at what can we do.
Okay, we're dealing with recommendation 3.3, which is about considering the inquiry proposed. So we've done that for each of them. And I would like to try and move towards a resolution of which inquiries we take forward. There is up to 4 inquiries could be taken forward. It doesn't mean that we have to take 4. We could decide to go on less than 4. But this is a decision that I just want to come to now in an open way. This is to be dictated by myself or any other individual, but openly as a committee, if we could decide what the priorities are that we'd like to move with, I would be very grateful. Sorry, Christian.
Just quickly, because obviously, for anyone, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're not taken forward at this stage, that they're not taken forward when we have the ability to do them. So it's not kind of a now or never.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, under which scrutiny does domestic violence fit?
Say again.
Under which scrutiny does domestic violence fit?
I think this one, wouldn't it?
Well, it's trans children and adults.
Go on, Nina.
So the
I'm
reason
going to take a stab at housing and neighbourhoods and community safety. But I think it's a really good example of something that's cross-cutting because I think it could also lead to education for young people.
So the reason why I mentioned this is that's why I raised the points around having a look at where the scrutiny fits. Because it fits into Councillor John's cost portfolio, it doesn't fit within the scrutiny. So in terms of putting the case for the inquiry, this is an issue which has been overlooked year in year out because it doesn't fit within a certain scrutiny, it just cross various ones. So for domestic violence, I've just come from visiting Birmingham Crisis, which takes in predominantly women with their families looking for a place to stay. I raised this question for council, colleagues may remember. Outline statistics, around 56% of young people experience some form of controlling behaviour. 1 in 3 women will experience some form of domestic violence during lifetime. Of course, it affects men. Us as magistrates, 9 out of 10 domestic violence cases don't go to trial because of various reasons, which leads to the trial not going through. So this is something for us also to consider, because I see the role of cohort is to perhaps try and fill the gaps. This is one of the gaps which could do some looking.
Got a number of members who want to come in on point two. Jack.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps a comment on the housing. The Housing and Neighbourhoods Overview Scrutiny Committee suggestion for their inquiry. I do feel that perhaps that could fit more largely into the work that the Cohort Scrutiny Committee is going to do around customer services and our response there. And actually, because it's not my scrutiny committee and I'm not on it, but I actually think the Housing and Neighbourhood Overview Scrutiny Committee could do a lot more work around HMOs and the issues there. I do slightly agree with Alex when it comes to cohort being a place to fill those gaps sometimes. and perhaps there is some work that can be done there. But I do think that cabinet members are very clearly marked in terms of what scrutiny committees can call on them. And actually, I know that all the scrutiny committees have received details from scrutiny officers telling us which cabinet members link to our scrutiny committees and what remits that we have as scrutiny committees and what remits the chairs are supposed the members are supposed to respond to. So I think there is a clear outline of the members and which ones, which scrutiny committees that they link to. But perhaps some consideration around the housing option being something slightly different, or perhaps not being taken up as an inquiry. I think would be more beneficial use of officer time.
We decided not to look at discussion with officers, decided not to look at trying to mirror the changes in the cabinet remits that came about at this AGM, at the last AGM, and rather to try and ensure that we properly mapped the remits against remits of scrutiny committees. So that piece of work we just referred to, Karen. Hopefully, nothing will fall between the cracks, albeit I think if interest isn't picked up in a particular committee or by the cabinet, particular overview scrutiny committee or by the cabinet member, that's when an issue tends to get lost. And I think Alex is right in that sense. It's not being picked up as a matter to take forward. But ONS is quite clearly a vehicle by which we can look at where there are cracks and where things are falling through cracks and bring something forward to the consequence.
I think if there are gaps, it's very easy to stop into it.
Kerry, I don't know, you want to mention?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points on Alex's point. I do agree because it's very cross-committee focus on the domestic violence, and of course, you know, the definition is different for children and young people than it is for if you're an adult, and that causes, you know, that can make it quite problematic as well. We've talked about this before. I mean, Alex and I have had a lot of discussions about a lot of big issues. So I think that in particular would be a really good one for the board to have a look at. If there's space on the work plan, I think this work plan that you put forward so far, Chair, is really good in terms that it allows us with a bit of flexibility that we can start to implement it. In terms of the housing and neighbourhoods inquiry proposal, I'm not sure whether we need a scrutiny inquiry to tell us whether our service, streets are clean and our list is being picked up. But I would, if we go with that inquiry, I would hope that the localisation matters that Councillor Harman picked up are taken on board. Also that we look at how residents are being supported, those residents that are out there day in, day out, assisting the council on local streets, picking up rubbish, how they're being supported at the moment and whether or not we can support them even more as a council, because clearly we can't do it all on our own, but we need to ensure that our citizens are valued in terms of what they're contributing to the local neighbourhoods. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, I think we've got to bring this to a conclusion. You and I will allow you in for 60 seconds.
It was just that I think it was September last year or even earlier than that, John Cotton's portfolio moved under this committee. So that I think domestic violence is well truly in John Cotton's patch. So I think if anyone's going to hold John Cotton to account, we're meant to be a critical friend in all this, I think it's this committee that should be doing that. So if this committee wants to do a body of work around it, I think I can't see any reason, as long as the chair agrees, why we can't do it.
Yeah, just to reiterate the point that's been made earlier is that the committees aren't linked to individual portfolio holders. So a number of the companies do cross across a number of committees. I think it's been under discussion. This is obviously a cross-cutting issue. it is a cross-cutting issue, this is the place to take it, but, you know, depending on how you cut this particular issue or other issues, it may well be under sort of community safety, as the crime disorder committee would be, housing and neighbourhoods, and there's other ways to do it. But just to be clear though, just because a cabinet member is linked to COLE doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to other committees or parts of their portfolio that link to that committee's terms of reference.
I get that, but it's really important. I hope a bit from the Children's Trust the other day, the fact that domestic violence has and that goes on means that I think it's a big body of work and everyone should look at it.
Okay, so I need to bring this to this conclusion. I'm trying to deal with recommendations 3.3. I think the first thing to do is decide whether we want to take forward 4 or whether we're prepared to go with less than 4. I get the feeling that you want to just initiate the process and sort of like take that decision. Am I right or wrong in that?
Are we making a decision on a specific inquiry?
Yes. We've got, this is the committee, Jack, which is empowered, if you like, to take a decision. We've got up to 4 inquiries. We've got more than 4 that have been nominated, and therefore this committee has to take that decision. And that's what we're about to do.
So are you looking for proposals from the floor?
Yeah, and I've already said I want to be quite open with this. I don't want to dictate. I've got my own views which ones should go forward, but I want to take members into consideration here in terms of what we'd like to see.
Can I make a proposal? Or that I would.
Right.
So the inquiries that I would like to see to coordinate forward would be, first of all, the education and children's social care inquiry around child exploitation. That's Appendix 2A. The health and wellbeing outcomes and the Commonwealth Games legacy, with health and social care, in joint with my committee, which is Appendix 2C, and also the economy and skills inquiry around the skills agenda, which is Appendix 2B, and then Appendix 2E, also from the health and social care scrutiny committee. Those are the 4 that I would propose that this committee takes forward as an inquiry.
Any comment, Roger?
I think that we should do the cleaner streets with the proviso that it does link into the localisation agenda, which of the, Jack's talked about 2 from the 1 scrutiny committee. Rather than saying which one is the most important, rely on them to that committee to decide which is the most important. I think the cleaner streets one doesn't.
Deirdre?
No, I'm just looking a bit
puzzled.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm probably going to share your puzzlement here. I do think the cleaner streets one will get caught up in the overview scrutiny work by this committee. Because this is about sorting out how services are being delivered. It's the management issues. It's how the resources are being put in, whether those reflecting concerns that are coming up via the customer services data that has been assembled. And it's about confirming that those changes that we are needing in service delivery are impacting positively at the community level. And that's what coordinating is going to do I hope, in pursuing that bit of work around customer services starting in September. In some ways, and it's across all services. That's the one difference. It's not simply focused in on waste management or cleaner streets. It's focused in on service delivery across the council.
But you need to do both of those things to get clean streets now.
I think there will be, because I can't remember the figures now, but over 50% of the complaint process is lied with waste management. I think I would, if I'm voicing a preference, I would go with the proposition that Jack has put forward.
Chair, I just wanted to check with Councillor Brown that if his committee were going to be taking up 2 inquiries, whether they'd have the capacity to do that, because, that's quite a lot of work.
Well, that's 3.4 as a recommendation, because they are joint. One is joint with Commonwealth Games, the other is joint with Education and Social Care. So once we've decided on the 4, if it is 4, then we have to go on and talk about the process that we will then follow through with.
And I have had some informal discussions with Amelia and Amanda around taking the work that would be required from Martin Committee, and we work through the joint piece of work together already. So we've had those informal discussions, and we have allocated in our work schedule for that to happen if it's chosen by co-op.
Can I just ask a simple question? How many scrutiny officers are there?
The structure is that Christian heads up the scrutiny office, and then he's got 2 management people below him, Amelia and Fiona, and then below those are another set of scrutiny officers.
How many?
There are, just write that down, but can I give you the information? I don't want to miss anyone. There's 4 or 5, it's not exactly, they don't all work full time. But I can provide the written answer so you can give it.
Presumably, the issue with this is capacity.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There is
That's why I wanted to know how many there are now.
there is a much smaller ONS resource than there used to be.
Yes, well, I realise that. Yes, I wasn't how much smaller. Because I don't think we've ever been in a situation before, have we, that every committee couldn't do one piece of work?
Well, we're not stopping them doing.
Well, all right, one report. We scored quite, I think, that goes to council. That is a proper scrutiny inquiry. Every committee used to do at least one of them. And sometimes they did not.
We had greater resource in those days.
Well, yes, I know, that's why I'm interested to know exactly how many we got, but we can't now have even one from each committee.
Well, look, it's never easy to go with everything, not to all everything. I am advised by officers and scrutiny officers that at this moment in time, it would be, we could manage to take forward 4 inquiries. They'll all be operating at the same time, because that would be initiating them, and if you look later in this report, the timetable by which this is done, the preparatory work will be July and August, moving into inquiries in September. So they will be going forward for 3/4 of the scrutiny year, perhaps. And I'm being advised that that is as much resource as we can enable at this present moment in time. If something becomes, if something else comes in, if there is further resource that is available to us, then we can come back to this issue. Nothing is ruled out.
It seems madness though, if you've only got to do 4, and then not every scrutiny committee can do like a big body of work like that, and then to give 2 to one committee seems odd.
They are joint, and we'd have to decide who takes the lead.
Can I just on the question, I mean, the numbers are in terms of human beings. We've got 2 managers, myself head of service, and we've got 5, if you like, scrutiny officers. As I said, they're not all full-time, work at the council. How we're going to be moving forward in terms of the resource is that Fiona and Amelia will be supporting the project work, so the inquiry work. Therefore, that's where we come, to do things well, to do things in the way that scrutiny should be done. We think that if we spread ourselves too thinly, and we were in that position at the end of last year, things won't be done in good scrutiny way. And that's why we have to prioritise.
Jack, Nick, and Roger, and Alex, and then I'm going to then force this to a conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think that it's strange that not every committee can do a piece of work, because actually, being here is about prioritisation, but also when we talk about the fact that one committee may have 2, it's already been pointed out that it will be a joint piece of work. But additionally, not every committee has put forward any wire proposals. So the argument that one committee shouldn't get 2, I don't think washes. Also, when it comes to the specific issues, it's already been pointed out that some committees can pick up different kinds of work and different kinds of inquiries that cross over. So I still don't see why one committee shouldn't have more than one inquiry. Some of us in this room sit on more than one scrutiny committee, and perhaps members need to go to those scrutiny committees and put forward their own suggestions for inquiries. But also, the work of scrutiny committees is not limited to simply inquiries, and there are other things that you can do in those scrutiny committees. You're all on other committees, so I think it's your responsibility also to put those things forward at those scrutiny committees.
Nick? I think everybody brief because we need to move this to a conclusion.
A comment would be we put forward 3 suggestions because they were 3 ideas. We weren't necessarily expecting to do all of them or potentially any of them. They were just things that we felt were relevant. I think maybe we could consider, if there's an issue in terms of capacity, actually going for 3 definites and then a sub one, which would come in where it was at when the capacity was more at that level.
Roger and then Alex.
Do we have to limit ourselves to full inquiries? Is there not something where we do bits of work that aren't full formal inquiries that allow us to move the agenda on? I just think if you just say, well, we're not doing the streets, albeit it's wrapped up in other things like customer service, but we might have to specifically look at it, will look strange. And there is the second bit in that, which I would ask Kristen about. Do we not have 1 or 2 areas where we've actually got a motion to council saying there needs to be a scrutiny supported by council? And if we're not actually going to do those bits of work, are we just ignoring what the council has said?
So the bits of work that have been on to the council have been picked up by the committees. So,
Now, little streets comes from a motion from council. Of course, yeah. So we were just saying, now we're just going to park that indefinitely.
Roger, we're not going to market. The discussion that I've had with Wendy Griffiths, the issues that will come out of that discussion in September are exactly the remit, if you like, that the committee has come forward with. But it's not simply across the waste management service, albeit waste management has the greatest number of complaints in the system, and waste management is one of those priority areas where we do need to ask the question: how is the data shaping that waste management service that will make it run more efficiently and effectively for the customers? And that is the real question here. We know what the problem is out in the street, and we've known about this problem for several years. Well, who is addressing the problem and putting things right so that it works for the benefit of the customers, the residents of Birmingham? Deirdre keeps coming to this point. What is the impact?
Yes.
And that's what the coordinating committee will get to.
I fully agree with what you're saying. But my point is that there is a broader agenda on cleaner streets. There are issues like how we manage flats above shops. There is issues like that, and that's what's going to get parked.
There's no reason why that cannot be done within the Homes and Neighbours Committee. That's a little bit of work that can go on there. That sort of issue could well be dealt with in parallel if you want to what the coordinating committee will take on.
Chair, can I suggest, you got recommendation for, we should go for, and if there is capacity for the extra one, at health and social care, we can pick that up, because this is such an important issue. And Mark Bridle, as a vice chair, acting vice chair, for the last 2 years, has done some work on this, and it's really important that we carry on that work.
Alex.
Thank you, Chair. I think to come back on what Jack said earlier, in the past, the scrutiny used to take report back to full council. And in terms of the capacity we had, it has significantly been reduced. So I don't really see it as a reason for us to try and do less. I think it's a reason for us to try and do more. Goes to what Kerry said around whether trying to do things in a big scope badly or trying to do things small. It is about trying to find a prioritisation and balance. In terms of the 4 choices, I try and urge colleagues to go for the child exploitation and mental health. The thing is, more priority is citywide, especially because of COVID, social cost of living crisis, so many things which is happening across the city. And I'd like to make a strong push to get forward for domestic violence, which I think again in co-ord, the capacity for us to pick up things which does get dropped and missed. It is clearly very possible something which has been missed. I can't remember a particular piece of work that's been done on domestic violence specifically, certainly in my limited.
Well, the domestic violence one is at the moment not on the table. I think what we can do is pick up on your thoughts around that matter. The officers talk to you, we can come back with a proposal subsequently. It's probably going to be the remit of coordinating, but we can come back and have a look at that as an agenda item for coordinating. But I suggest we keep it off the table at this moment in time. But we will come back to it. That would be very much in the notes of this meeting. I actually do have a proposal on the table. That was put a little earlier. And that was that we move forward with 4. Jack, would you like to reiterate what you said?
Yeah, no, that's what I started to think in mind. I think it was 2E, and it's 2E on the why is mentioned different for women from the health and social care scrutiny. And then the joint work 2C, promoting health and wellbeing rather than legacy. And then 2B from the economy and skills overviews from the Unity United Skills Agenda. And then appendix 2A, child exploitation in county lines, inquiry from the education and children's social care.
I've got a proposal on the table. Can I see whether the majority for that proposal? You just indicate, all of you. Anyone from the Conservative side or the Dem side?
Well, I want my
Okay.
preference for, we would take the streets to activate amenities, basic, I disagree about.
Any of the Conservative members? I'm trying to engage you here. Okay, on the basis of the hands that went up, I think.
Board alternative.
Sorry?
Board alternative.
I've got a problem with this agenda coming up very shortly. I'm not careful.
So Jack, you've got dementia, the Commonwealth Games, skills agenda, and the CSE. Can I propose that we swap the dementia with the mental health? So that would be the Commonwealth Games, skills agenda, CSE, and the mental health.
Let me get that right.
Not CSC.
So you've got, child sexual exploitation.
Yes, child exploitation, criminal exploitation.
Criminal, sorry.
And county lines.
Yes, so in effect, I'm proposing to swap from dementia. And supportive.
Mental health agenda for young people is such an important topic. It is hugely important.
Yes, it is.
And, I think that as a proposal, young people at this moment in time on a whole set of issues are hugely impacted by what has been going on in recent years. And the mental health of young people is a hugely important agenda for us.
That would be my preference, Chair, but I wanted to sort of leave it up to Councillor Brown because it's his committee and, if he's got a preference of his committee, but that would be my preference.
Yeah, so I've got my proposal and Alex has got an amendment to that, but I've gestured to Mick, and I would prefer that he make his opinion known on that.
I was happy. To me, it was very important. I don't have a problem with doing the 2 shared ones and leave the destination ones to one side.
Thank you. So then we've got a proposal in full.
So we've got to, let me get this clear, Nick. You move forward on the children and young people's mental health.
Yeah.
The Commonwealth Games, promoting health and well-being legacy issues. Ensuring a skills agenda for meets the needs of current and future employers. and child exploitation and county lines.
Yeah. Hey, Jack, are you okay? Yeah.
There we're nodding, okay? So those are the four we take forward. It doesn't mean that we don't come back to them, but what we need to do is take this decision now in order that the work starts in the scrutiny office to map this out over the course of this month in August. And that will be in consultation with the ONS chairs, appropriate ONS chairs. Now, what we need to come to, having dealt with 3.3, is we need to come to 3.4 and 3.5. Now, this is an issue about more than two committees being involved. And therefore, where, if you like, the lead is on this. And how many members you bring on from each of the committees to do this bit of work, these bits of work. So, are we saying on the two joint ones, which are Commonwealth Games and the mental health? One was with Commonwealth Games ONS, and the other one with the yours.
I'd say that Mick takes the lead on the mental health.
Yeah. And should take the and then if, because we have Amelia, sorry.
Okay, let me cut it off. So the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee takes the lead on
Exploitation.
yeah, takes the lead on mental health, children and young people's mental health.
Yes.
Sorry.
Chair, can I suggest before we go on to that discussion, because I think this is really important for the residents, and it is a big issue for the last 10 years. And as long as that is included in that report, I don't mind it.
We just keep going over these matters again, because took this up. Look, we've got a proposal, we've got four. Children and young people's mental health will be taken forward by the Health and Social Care Committee. Okay? That's agreed?
Yeah.
Then we've got the promoting health and well-being and Commonwealth Games legacy. That will be taken as a lead by your committee, Chair. Is that a proposal?
Yes.
But what we've got is ensuring the skills agenda is the economy and skills overview and scrutiny committee, leading on that. And that leaves us with child exploitation and county lines, which is the education and children's social care scrutiny leader.
Yes.
Okay, let's beyond this meeting, because I think we need to cut this agenda short. That means the officers can get on with this, but I'd like to have conversations with the chairs of the committees to determine the numbers that we'll bring forward from each committee. You need to think about this, and it will have to be on proportionality basis.
Surely it should be everybody, because you can't exclude people, can you? You may have somebody on the committee that really wants to be involved.
That's possible. But it's quite possible.
Then it would be proportionality if everyone was involved. Most two committees is two committees.
My understanding is that the work up through the committee is proportionally balanced, politically balanced, sorry. But a task and finish group, if it's decided that the mayors can decide the membership, that task and finish group doesn't have to report back to the committee. It is who sign off the report.
I think it would be wise for us to try and ensure that any subgroup takes account of proportionality. Otherwise, we exclude political groups from the discussion. I know what the rules say, but I would like to ensure that we have that proportionality built into the system at all times.
And now I would conclude parties.
Okay, so in terms, we will take forward, we've done 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3, and we'll take forward issues in respect to 3.4, 3.5, and indeed 3.6 beyond the meeting in consultation between myself, the chairs, and the scrutiny office. Okay?
Thank you.
Right, consider that now finished, taken rather longer than I hope. Date and time of next meeting, item 8, September the 9th at 10 a.m. Press for calling, council calling, etc. Item 9, there is nothing there. Item 10, other urgent business, I hope there is none. There is none, thank you. And authority to chair and officers, the usual resolution set out in the agenda. Thank you very much. We now can close the meeting, the formal meeting. I'm behind time. We can close the formal meeting and move into an informal session.